The new US administration is putting a lot of pressure on allies to step up their own defense and deterrence efforts, and that is simply going to absorb capacity.
Now, when Indo-Pacific, when activities are rising up, how does NATO perceive Indo-Pacific? What does it think about the Indo-Pacific? And where does India fit into this broader picture?
We as Europeans were in for the last few decades that essentially a third country, our US allies, were providing security for Europe in the way they were and still are. It's a fairly unusual situation historically and globally, and where we look to India as a partner, clearly. And again, even if it's not India is not an institutional partner, so at its origin is, if you like, a security organization to provide security for the North Atlantic, as the name says. Looking to do is really develop relations across the entire spectrum, starting from security through climate, through to human resources and human contacts. So that is, I think, how we approach India and the broader region.
Hey everyone, welcome to the first podcast of the inaugural NATO-India Youth Conference. And what an honor to host with us Ambassador Rainer Rudolph, Vice Chairman of the Munich Security Conference. Mr. Ambassador, so far, how have your visit to India been?
It's not even been 24 hours, but so far it's been fantastic. It's lovely outside, and I'm so happy to be here.
It's a pleasure, sir, hosting you for this conversation. Thank you now. So, as a first question, what we want to ask you is that as you've had an extensive diplomatic career and you've dealt with European security and transatlantic alliances, so what I want to ask you is, and the theme for this podcast is new security pathways for a changing world. How do you think the world is changing? How the global order is evolving? And what do you think about it?
So at our own conference, the Munich Security Conference, which was held just 4 weeks ago, we gave it the motto multipolarization, which is an artificial word, if you like. It's an artificial term. And the idea behind that was that we tried to put in this one word two trends that we observed. Starting with multipolarity, which is in international relations, which is a trend which we see in so many ways, where you have this old order, which we all got accustomed to, the old international order for the last decades, if you like, being put into question, being tested by strong powers, poles. That's why we speak of multipolarity. And at the same time, in parallel to that, we see increasing polarization, both inside some countries and also in the relationship between two countries. So it's really those two trends that we felt are defining for the evolving international order right now, which we also felt, we can literally see in the discussions we had at our conference, at the Munich Security Conference last month. So this is how we came up with this term of multipolarization as a catch-all, if you like, to try to encompass many competing trends in the international order right now.
So, sir, as you talked about that, how multipolarization is one of the themes that's almost running as an undercurrent to a whole lot of changes that are happening. With that, I would like to come to the Indo-Pacific because I believe Indo-Pacific is a hotbed for multipolarization. Now, NATO has been engaging in the Indo-Pacific through its member states. And while India and NATO cannot have a formal partnership, what areas do you think the two blocs, which is NATO and India, can collaborate upon for cooperation?
Well, looking at areas of cooperation, I would look at what are common interests in the region and between our region, and I can come up with several. First, look at how simply security theaters have become connected over those last few years. Without going into too much detail, look how Korean Peninsula, Ukraine, Russia's war against Ukraine have become connected simply by the fact that North Korean troops and arms are being deployed by Russia in their war against Ukraine. That is just one example. So security theaters are connected. Then I think we simply have joint interests, like, for example, defending the rules-based order where it comes to freedom of passage and high seas. That is clearly, I think, a joint interest of both our regions. A third and completely other area would be the entire area of cyber security and cyber defense. So I would start by looking at where do we have joint interests and where can we agree on working on them. And just to give one example, since you rightly mentioned it is more NATO member states than actually NATO as an organization being visible here. My own country, Germany, did its, as you know, did its second naval deployment last year with the passage of a naval frigate through the Indo-Pacific and also making visit here in India and Goa.
So you talked about Germany. So before we come to our next question, I'd like to sort of ask you about German view on Indo-Pacific because you also are the vice chairman of the Munich Security Conference. So when you're looking at the Indo-Pacific, and right now I ask you the German perspective, what are the sort of activities that you think Germany is looking up to take in the Indo-Pacific?
So let me start here in India. The last time I was here was just not even 6 months ago, when the large Asia Pacific conference of the German business community was taking place here. It's a large event which takes place every 2 years, and the last year it was here in Delhi, where essentially our entire business community comes to Asia to work on those tags. And last time it took place at the same time as the formal intergovernmental consultations between our two governments, Burman and Indian, which take place also every 2 years, and the port visit in Goa, which I already mentioned. So, and it had been prepared by a new strategy paper, if you like, Focus on India, which our federal government had issued just immediately ahead of all of these events. So I think what we're looking to do is really develop relations across the entire spectrum, starting from security through climate, through to human resources and human contacts. So that is, I think, how we approach India and the broader region.
All right, sir. So far we've discussed a spectrum of issues in which, let's just say, NATO and India could sort of cooperate. Let's just say how Germany would look at India. But what I want to ask you about is that what's NATO's perspective on Indo-Pacific? Because let's just say historically NATO has been focusing on the Atlantic area, and now again as an institution, right? And now when Indo-Pacific, when activities are rising up, how does NATO perceive Indo-Pacific? What does it think about the Indo-Pacific? And where does India fit into this broader picture?
So several things. First, as you quite rightly say, NATO at its origin is, if you like, a security organization to provide security for the North Atlantic, as the name says. And that is where its focus has always been. And where I would add, I think it is also going to be in the in the immediate future for several reasons. As I'm sure you're aware, the new U.S. administration is putting a lot of pressure on allies to step up their own defense and deterrence efforts, and that is simply going to absorb capacity. Let's be honest. Number two, we do have an immediate security challenge in Europe, which is again Russia's war against Ukraine. So that also simply absorbs attention and capacity and resources. Having said all that, it is of course true that so many of our security challenges, and I mentioned some of them, um, are global, include the Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific region, and where we look to India as a partner, clearly. And again, even if India is not an institutional partner, let's work on security tasks where we can. I mentioned the freedom of the sea, for example, and of course, my country is never going to be a strong naval power in the Pacific simply by our size, but by this naval deployment, we wanted to signal this is our interest, and we are here to show that. I could imagine that in terms of defense cooperation, there's a lot of potential between our countries and between other European countries and India as well to explore. So I think there is a range of issues where we can work together in practice um, without being held too long by organizational, institutional questions.
So you talked about a lot of things right now, and one of the things that I want to address is, or perhaps as the elephant in the room, that there are a lot of talks about European security. Maybe nations are asking Europe to step up for its own security. I want to know, as someone who's also European, what do you think about this? Does Europe really wants to sort of come up and then pay for its own security? What's your perspective on this? Because there are so many questions and so many polarized opinions about this. I would want to hear your views on this.
Well, I think it has to happen. And personally, I also think it will happen because I think the situation we as Europeans were in for the last few decades, that essentially a third country, our US allies, were providing security for Europe in the way they were and still are. It's a fairly unusual situation historically and globally, if you look at it. I couldn't think of many others. So um, I think what is happening now, my country and many other European countries as well, really stepping up our efforts to provide our own security and deterrence and defense. In a sense, it is a back to normal, if you like. And just to give you one figure, we like to look at our defense spending in terms of share of GDP. We are now just going back to levels we already had 30, 40 years ago. So it's not totally unusual what is happening now.
All right. One of the things that you really highlighted is that, given if you look at the current perception, everyone seems to think that, or a lot of people, or a lot of popular quarter seems to think that, oh, Europe has not been sort of paying up for its own security. But as you pointed out, that the defense budgets or the spending on, defense things, it's just going back to what it was 30, 40 years ago, which is not that long a time. With that, sir, perhaps one of the last questions for this conversation is going to be about, there is a lot of interest in young people. They want to work in foreign policy, they want to work into diplomacy, and you've had a really long career, and then there's so much advice that you can give to young people right now. What are some of the things that the young can do right now, or should do right now, if they are to sort of make space for themselves into foreign policy or diplomacy or international relations? What would you say on that?
Well, thanks for reminding me I'm old, but you're quite right. What I would say is, look, the path I chose for myself to be a diplomat is one way of working on international relations, on working on trying to work on, as we call it at the Munich Security Conference, peace through dialogue, which is the motto of our organization. But there are so many other ways to do that if you want to. You can go into politics. You can work as a politician in international relations where you can find important roles. You can also work at an international organization, talking about strengthening the international order. That happens through international organizations. You can work as a researcher. You can work at an NGO. So I think there is so many ways to pursue this topic and try to contribute to um, uh, peaceful international relations. I find it fascinating. I would encourage any young person to pursue that if that's what they want to do.
Perhaps, sir, I think we could really host another podcast with you some other day in terms of what all advices would you have for the young people and the things that we could do together. But before we let you go and we for this conversation, I would want to ask you just one line about what do you think about the NATO-India Youth Conference?
When I first heard about it, when you got in touch, I thought it's such a fantastic project simply because it's um, challenging young people to think about these topics like we're just discussing right now, making them aware that what all of us do inside our own countries is always in some way connected to the international environment we're living in and working with, and trying to shape that uh, with the vision of a peaceful world. That's a fantastic place to be in. So, congratulations.
So those are really kind words. I thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. May. Thank you.